Thank you for coming here. Grover Norquist is one of the most important American president of a think tank. The American for Tax Reform is an institution in the United States and in Washington. So my first question is why you are in Rome and why you are in Italy?
In Italy and in Rome, because now with a new president in the United States and with a conservative Prime Minister in Italy, there are real opportunities for the two countries to work together, and particularly because the United States doesn't have a particularly strong relationship with the Prime Minister of Britain, wrong party, wrong worldview, or France, or Germany. And Germany, for whatever reason, seems to have decided to self-destruct as a country and not use energy and not grow. I don't understand it, but Europe is still important, and the person to speak to in Europe who would best understand the American worldview with President Trump and the Republican Party in charge of the House, the Senate, most governorships, most state legislative bodies, the Republican Party would be to work with your Prime Minister and Italy. So I think there are real opportunities to promote liberty and to promote European and American working together, avoiding tariffs, avoiding trade wars, and keeping an eye on those nations, China, the Soviet Union / Russia, which would threaten the rest of the world.
So you mentioned tariffs. You can imagine in the European and also in the Italian political and also mediatic debate, the topic of tariff is quite discussed in this day. Do you think that tariffs can represent a danger for Europe? And in your opinion, what is the best approach for the European Union to try to avoid or starting a discussion with Donald Trump about tariffs?
President Trump has used tariffs as a negotiating tool in dealing with Panama. Panama had allowed the Chinese to manage both ends of the Panama Canal, which is very problematic, and they were threatened with tariffs if they didn't end that relationship. They did. It was not about trade. It was about protecting the Panama Canal from Chinese control. In Colombia, the Colombians were refusing to receive criminals from Colombia who had come to the United States that we wanted not in the United States, and they agreed to that. And on border security, both with Mexico and with Canada, both countries had made promises about securing the border from their side, but not followed that through, had not kept their word. And so Trump said tariffs unless you do what you said you were going to do. And they've made commitments. Yes, we will get that done, understanding that if they don't, the tariffs will come in. There's a different use of tariffs, is where you put them on permanently because you deliberately are trying to make it difficult to trade with one country, or because you want to create monopoly rents on behalf of somebody inside your country, raising the price of all goods for steel or aluminum, for instance, which benefits certain steel companies inside the United States. They have prices way beyond the world market, way higher than the world market. I think with Europe, the discussion of tariffs might come up in a conversation of why don't you do what you said you were going to do in financing your military in NATO.
Yeah.
And it might seem like two different things, but I'm not sure President Trump, he sees it as two different things. One is you promised and you didn't do it. What's going on? The other is sometimes the president has talked about using tariffs as a way to generate revenue instead of something else. The U.S. gets less than 1% of its federal revenue from tariffs. Tariffs are not part of the revenue stream of the United States that matters, and never will be. the world is past that time when governments are so small that tariffs at 1% of GDP can fund much of the government. I'd love to go to a time where tariffs could fund much of the government because the government was much smaller. But that does not require raising tariffs, it requires reducing the size of government.
Yeah, that's an important point because Vice President Vance came to France yesterday, and he did a speech where he said that over-regulation is the biggest problem for HI, but in general for Europe. Don't you think that in Europe there is a big problem of over-regulation? And for example, when we talk about the tech, some law like the Digital Service Act has a negative impact on the market?
Yes, the legitimate anger in the United States at the European regulatory state, Digital Services Act, the effort to have a floor on taxes, to set up a cartel, an OPEC for a tax policy so that the corporate rate for everybody in the world would be at 15%. That's very problematic for the United States. We will not tolerate any country or group of countries telling us that we have to have high taxes. The British tried to do that several hundred years ago, and we started shooting at them and made them go away. We need to be able to bring our taxes down because our taxes are too high. We have no intention of having taxes as high as Europe. Yeah. And our regulatory burden is too high. Not necessarily as bad as Europe, but it's too high. And when Europe uses antitrust or tax policy to attack American high-tech firms, that is problematic, and that is the sort of issue that Trump might well employ a tactical tariff. If you don't fix this, we will fill in the blank. And I hope that we can avoid that, because Europe ought not to be discriminating against American firms that are high-tech on taxation or on regulation.
And when we talk about try to find an agreement with Trump about tariffs, do you think for a country like Italy is better to try to have a discussion with Trump in a bilateral way, or is better to have a discussion as a European Union? Because right now there is a strong debate if for our country it's better to have stronger bilateral relation, or having a relation between the European Union and the United States and not as a single country.
Both, because bilateral relations between our president and your prime minister will proceed much more quickly, because there's more understanding than there is with the European Union. There's more willingness to see the other person's point of view. You deal with Europe as a whole, they have no understanding of the United States at all. And they probably look at America and say, you guys don't understand what we're doing, which is probably true, because it makes no sense to us anyway. But the United States and Italy should be talking so that down the road a conversation between Europe and the United States will be easier. And where Trump understands Europe better, to get lectured by somebody who runs some committee inside something called Europe that he can't put his finger on, or understand what the pressures are on that person, is less likely to move forward than talking to a head of state in Italy, which is much more understandable, who could walk through the advantages and disadvantages of different approaches in dealing with Europe. But I still think it'll be, with Trump, it's often one-on-one relationships, and you can have that with an Italian prime minister. It's more difficult with a bureaucracy.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what do you think about the influence of Elon Musk? And do you think that Elon Musk and for example, Starlink can represent an opportunity for Europe or a danger?
Well, Elon Musk does a number of different things. He is planning to go to Mars.
Yeah.
And he runs Starlink, a communications satellite firm. He has a whole series of businesses. He has a car company, and also a company that tunnels under the ground and makes tunnels. Artificial intelligence, in addition. There's very little he doesn't do. But he's also taken on the task of reforming the US government at President Trump's request, and has come in with a different approach, looking at all the checks that get sent out. Who are they going to? Do we know? How many? Does some person get many checks, or they get one check? Do we have the Social Security numbers for these people getting checks? It's amazing to me what they're discovering, and it's even more amazing that nobody ever bothered to look before. The press, which likes to think of itself as the guardian of the people to keep an eye on government, had no interest in guarding against waste. They, in fact, were getting millions of dollars from the government, who bought their subscriptions of their publications and their services. Of course they're not going to criticize the government. They're paid by the government. They're on the payroll. This is a little bit of a surprise to people as to why some of these publications might slavishly salute every time the government comes up with a dumb idea. And they go, that's a great idea. And when people criticize the bureaucracy, you can't do that. And they seem to always be defending the bureaucracy. You wonder why? That's the source for their news stories, and it's who buys their news stories. It's all a big circle.
Yeah.
And there's cash involved in the cycle. So Elon Musk is busting that up, serving at the pleasure of the president, and he is still day to day running his businesses. So he has a good staff that's obviously very expert on high tech and how you go in and look through the computers of the government, find out what does the government know and how do they make things work or not. It is a shake-up the American government needed every decade, and we're late to the game.
Two more questions. And what do you think about his political influence and the idea of a mega movement? Because how you know there is the MAGA movement, but right now he, especially for the German election, the 23rd of February, there will be the German election. There is the AfD, that is a right-wing party which is becoming day by day stronger, and so the Musk launched the mega movement. What do you think about this idea?
Well, in the United States, we have a Republican Party. President Trump is the head of the Republican Party. He has labeled Make America Great Again, which is a slogan he got from Ronald Reagan, who led the Republican Party to two tremendous victories when he ran for president. And Trump, in many ways, is very much like Reagan. He has the advantage. Reagan didn't have a House and a Senate that were Republican. Trump does. So Trump can actually pass legislation that Reagan could only dream of. And the country is also ready for more dramatic change under Trump than it was under Reagan, because the failures of the left-wing bureaucracy are clearer to everybody. How an American political movement translates into other countries, there's some similarities, but in other ways not similarities. I certainly have an awful lot of sympathy, as does President Trump, for Milei in Argentina. He has a rather dramatic version of the government got too big, the labor unions got too powerful, the tariffs were too high, they didn't have free trade, and everything went to Hades. Take it all apart. The United States is not that far down the road as Argentina was, but it's helpful to see somebody who did get that far down the road beginning to come back and reform things. And that reminds us that we could do the same thing. I hope that Germany can do the same thing. I do not understand all the various parties in Germany and how they can or can't work together. And it's a little bit dangerous for Americans to guess that because somebody calls themselves the Conservative Party, that has anything to do with American conservatism or not. So I'm not in a good place to be able to suggest which parties can and can't accomplish this. I know in Germany, the free market people have questions about the AfD.
Okay, and one last question. Do you have any advice for our Prime Minister? I mean, a few years ago you launched the idea of the tax pledge, and in Italy we don't have, unfortunately, this idea, but what are your advice for our Prime Minister?
I think the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which we share with all the Republican candidates, and most sign the pledge and keep it, is a good one for any political party. If you are a party of limited government, to promise the people of your city, your town, your province, your state, your country, I'm not going to raise taxes. What that means is when I have a problem, I'm going to reform government. Folks on the left, when they have a problem, they raise taxes to cover up the problem, to double down on the mistake. And if you take that off the table, you say, how do we fix this problem? We're not raising taxes. Well, then you begin to say, well, maybe too much government is the problem here, here, and here. Could we have less regulation, lower taxes, less interference with people's decisions? I think the pledge actually is a very good idea for any political party that stands with the taxpayers rather than with the government. I want the taxpayers to be happy. I want citizens to be happy as opposed to I want the bureaucracy to be happy. You can always raise taxes, make the bureaucracy very happy. So the opportunity to say no to tax increases and to constantly be looking for baby steps as well as big steps towards liberty. Find a problem in Italy, too much government is a piece of that problem, just like in the United States, and then focus on removing that part of the problem.
Thank you very much for